This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com. The only place.
So maybe it's not as new, but still one of the most listened to of our monthly shows here on the PTV Wrestling Network. Welcome to Through the Looking Glass. I am your co-host, Scott Criscuolo. Thank you for all of your support. Not just, all of our shows, because all of our shows, the epic OGs, but even some of our newer shows like this one and PTBN's Pedestal and YouTube Roulette and the other Sean's new show, When I Was a Mark. Ton of new shows that have popped up over the last few months, and that includes, of course, this one, which started back in October, right?
October, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Who's that voice, everyone? Doesn't it? It thunders from the sky. Ladies and gentlemen, I always bring him in because he is an OG, and he's one of my personal favorite humans on the planet, even though he's on the other end of the planet. The Thunder from Down Under, Mr. Dave Hall. Happy Easter, post-Easter, I guess, Dave. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Hi to everyone out there listening in the PTB Nation, the PTB Network, and it's post-Easter. I've had a lovely Easter weekend down here in Australia. We've after about 6 to 8 weeks of what felt like non-stop rain, we'have had a lovely and glorious, beautiful weekend. So it's been a great way to spend time with family, and my two sons have enjoyed being out and about and out in the sun and hunting for eggs, and they're getting a bit old for that, but hunting for the Easter eggs and enjoying their chocolate. So I hope everyone had a great Easter weekend, a great Easter break, and it's been fantastic. How's life up there in the northern hemisphere?
Well, it's funny you mentioned good weather, because I always goof with you that, obviously, for those that don't know, where we are, depending where you are here in the in the western hemisphere, over where Dave is, it's the complete opposite. So in January, when it was like 3 degrees, Dave, it was 103 degrees. But it's funny, Dave, we almost were in symmetry, because like late last week, Thursday, Friday, it was getting up to the mid 60s, almost 70 in some spots here in Connecticut in the Northeast. But Easter Sunday, it dropped back into the 40s. So it's like winter just wants to keep kicking us while we're down and not going away and making our lives miserable. So hopefully by the time we do May's episode, you and I will be kind of in symmetry. We could both have the same temperature. Of course, by July, I'll be in the 90s and you'll be in the teens. But which is pretty funny. But I don't know. We'll see. But again, I'm so happy to be with you as always on our monthly journeys, Dave. For those that have not had a chance to listen, our episode. If you're clicking on this, and I've said this the last few episodes, so I'll probably stop after this one. If you're clicking on this episode for the first time, welcome. Welcome to our show, Through the Looking Glass, and welcome, of course, to the PTB Wrestling Network. If you are new, our shows are not chronological. It's not like the Place to Be podcast or where we're going in an order of something. Dave and I are doing completely separate journeys from each other. So you may continue to listen to this episode, and then please go to the back catalog starting back in November. And we had October. And we had a fun time. Let's see. So in October, we did, this is also the last time I'm going to do this. In October, our first episode, we went through CM Punk's 2011, 2012 into early 13 run and kind of maybe tweaked it a little bit. November, of course, Dave really wanted us to go to the Pink Skied universe. We went to a time where everything in 1997 at WWF was happy and copacetic. There was no Montreal. There was no screw job. Sean, Brett, Vince, everybody was happy at the same time. And we kind of rebooked the Attitude Era with Brett around. That was a fun episode. I enjoyed that. Check that one out if you haven't listened. December, we rebooked Goldberg's streak in WCW. January, we did a Royal Rumble episode. February, we rebooked Ultimate Warrior 1990, 1991, kind of tweaked his world title reign a little bit and tried to get some more legs out of it. And of course, in March, we did a WrestleMania themed episode. So great shows. please check them out. Again, they're not chronological, so you don't have to shut this one off and go back to episode 1. Please keep listening. But then when you're done here, check out our back catalog of not just our show, but all the great shows here on the PTB Wrestling Network. The last 2 episodes have been a little longer than we usually plan, but we'll try and be pretty tight with this one. However, this is going to be a fun one. This is totally Dave's idea, and Dave likes to make things tough for him and I because we are very experienced wrestling fans. So we've lived through many, many years of everything in professional wrestling. So this was an interesting topic and also very themed. Fortunately for the time, that has in terms of current events in pro wrestling, we lost one of the most popular and beloved wrestlers in our business, and Dave decided to kind of do an episode kind of themed on that. So, Dave, my brother, why don't you? Well, first of all, before we do that, obviously we are a couple of weeks past what was a exceptional WrestleMania. Everyone knows how my WrestleMania was because I was there, and check out last Monday, we dropped episode 600 of the Place Be podcast, and JR and I did live from Dallas. So you know how we were. And I talked about it on Main Event. I talked about it on the NWA Saturday Special. So everybody knows my feelings on the show. But Dave, it's the first time I've talked to you, sir. What were your thoughts, positives and negatives, of the 2 days of WrestleMania in Arlington?
Well, I'll be honest. It has been a long time since I had a desire or an inkling to even try and sit and watch a full show, let alone 2 nights of a show. But I did sit down and watch both nights of WrestleMania. And I will say, I'm going to say at the start of this, I really enjoyed the event. It was a really good event. I think they did a really good job. I think that the first night was absolutely exceptional. If the first night was all you got, if night 1 of WrestleMania was the only WrestleMania event you got all year, I think it would have ranked up as one of the best ever. I really was that high. The first night flew by. I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of great stuff. Obviously, Austin's return to the ring was outstanding, and he really brought it. And credit to Kevin Owens for helping Austin work the type of match that Austin needed. It was clear that they had to take some shortcuts, and they had to work around Austin's limitations with his body, but at the same time, you wouldn't have known it. Looking at the match and looking at what they did, it was outstanding, and I really enjoyed that match and really enjoyed that whole first night. So yeah, it was good. But then the second night was okay, but I think both on the back of what they pulled off on the first night, I really felt a bit of a letdown. There were a variety of circumstances, I think, that didn't help the situation. That the second night it felt like a real downer, and I think in the end it sort of brought the overall feel of the weekend back a little bit. So to move from one of the best ever to it was all right. It was good, but it sort of, I struggled to get through the second night. That was the big key for me, the big difference. The first night flew, the second night started to drag.
What was your thoughts? Because I have to give WWE a lot of credit because I was very surprised. I didn't know if they would do this or not. They gave, because it was 2 nights, and it was obviously pre-announced that Austin would be there for night 1 with the Kevin Owens and the match that we thought would ever happen. But the fact that they did something where Austin came out again Sunday night, and then Taker also came out Sunday night, because let's be honest, and WWE was smart to do this. You can't think or rely on the fact that everybody that's in the building bought both tickets, both nights, because, and I've said this on multiple shows that I talked about it, the people that sat in front of me on Sunday were not the people that sat in front of me on Saturday. Totally different row of people. Our row was the same. We sat in different seats on both nights. We switched them around for ourselves. But the fact that WWE gave everybody Steve Austin on both Saturday and Sunday, as well as Taker, I thought was pretty cool. And I thought it was very smart on them and smart business-wise to give people the benefit that maybe they couldn't go Saturday, but were there Sunday, and it wasn't fair that only one night got both Austin and Taker. What were your thoughts on that?
Look, I think it was good. For me, some things I felt were a little telegraphed. The moment Vince stayed at ringside for that Austin Theory McAfee match, I think everyone knew Austin was coming down, and it was a good way to bring that back, because Austin was about bringing in the fans from that era. I mean, new fans are not tuning in to the product to see Steve Austin. That's got that nostalgia feel to it, but Austin being promoted the way he was, the target audience were people like me, people who were big Austin fans, lived through the Attitude Era, lived through that time, maybe aren't sticking with the product as much, not watching week to week and not as closely following the way they used to. That to me was why they brought Austin in, and to have that little run in with Vince on the Sunday, I think was a good resolution. And like I said, I knew it was coming the minute I knew Vince was going to be at ringside. There was a lot of rumors about him being involved in the McAfee match, so you knew that was always coming. So I thought it was good. I thought they kept the second night. They didn't overuse Austin. He came out, he stunned Vince, he stunned Theory, he stunned McAfee, mm-hmm. and then he left. Like they didn't overplay it to the point that you sat there and go, well, it took anything away from what he did with Kevin Owens on night one. So mm-hmm. Right. I thought they kept it well. The same with Taker. He came out, he greeted everyone, he did the arm up, and then he walked off. They didn't overplay anything, and I think that was good, because it gave what they did on the first night prominence and made it important. And then on the second night, those who, like you said, those who maybe didn't see it, they got a taste. They got a taste of the star of the sort of impact they have, without taking away anything from what else was happening that night.
I agree with you on that. I think that Austin, I don't think you're never going to see him again, but he got a lot out of the weekend. And that's it. I think Austin will be off camera. I think you'll see more. Broken Skull sessions on the network or Peacock, depending where you live. But I think that was his one match. We're good. I'm good. We're good.
I think that's what Austin. You get the feeling that's what Austin wanted. We know that the match he had, his previous last match against The Rock, while it was in a prominent role, it's well documented that Austin was struggling with his health. He had the anxiety attack the mm-hmm. night before and wasn't sure he was going to get in, and he's even admitted he wasn't as happy with that match as he would like. So Austin's previous last match for him was a letdown. What he put on this WrestleMania, it makes it a respectable last match. It makes it something that he can go away going, man, I would be happy with what I did, and I'd be happy with the reaction, and I'd be happy with how it went down, and what he produced in the ring for his body condition, I think was outstanding. I think they kept him in the t-shirt and the shorts, I guess, they were wanting to make it a bit more of a surprise when they were, had been advertising it was going to be the sit down talk, although everyone knew something more was going to happen. If he'd come out in the tights, it would have given away what was going to happen. It might have been nice to see him strip the shirt off during the match, or have Owens strip it off him during the match, but because there's a lot of talk he's in really good condition. So whether he needed to stay in the shirt, look, I don't think, I've heard the arguments and debates. I don't think that really matters, because what matters is Austin produced. Austin produced, and we know Austin's always been a perfectionist about what he produces in the ring. He's been very vocal about that, and he produced something that I think he would be proud of, and that's a good way to sign out.
Yep, I agree 100%. All right, speaking of Mania and what ifs and things that we thought wouldn't happen and did, let us dive into this month. We're not talking about WrestleMania for this whole show, but I was going around the horn. It's the first time Dave and I have chatted since it happened, so I wanted to make sure Dave got his opinions. You guys have heard mine more than enough times. You don't have to listen to me talk about it. So, but speaking of guys who, were big over the similar to Austin's era, maybe a little bit slightly before. Dave, why don't you introduce us to tonight's topic, because it's very topical, and I think it's something that it's another great topic that everybody's going to think about. So, fire away, sir. Get us ready.
Yeah, well, as you alluded to earlier, just probably a week after we finished recording our last episode, the wrestling world was shaken and shocked by the sudden passing of the legendary Scott Hall, and it was very sad, and it got me thinking about who Scott Hall was and how he was presented. And one of the things that struck me when I went back and looked at Scott Hall and looked at his career, one of the things that really stood out to me is that for a lot of his career, early in his career, he was often touted as a future world champion. If you were a reader of PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated and its sister magazines often talked him up as someone to watch in the future, someone who will probably be a future world champion. When you look at the lists, when people like to put together their lists of the best wrestlers never to win a world title, Scott Hall is normally near the top of that list. Along with guys like your Mr. Perfects and your Ted DiBiase's. Scott Hall is one of the people who normally comes at the top of that list. And it got me thinking, what if Scott Hall had an opportunity to be a world champion? I do think there were multiple times when he was presented or placed in a role or in a level in the companies that he was working for where it was I don't think it was far away from being given a run with the belt. And so I thought it'd be a good idea. It'd be a good way to honor Scott Hall and a good way to give some good tribute to him, to have a little bit of a look at some of the parts of his career where perhaps a world title run would not have been out of the question, would have been something that I think the wrestling universe would have accepted and would have enjoyed seeing. So tonight's looking glass is just that. We're going to look at a little bit at Scott Hall's career and have a look at times when maybe he could have become a world champion. But before we get there, Scott, talking about Scott, when did Scott Hall first come across your radar? Because as I said, he was, for those of us that were growing up in that time period, and in the late 80s, early 90s, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, he was one of those guys who was being put out there. He was a guy that got a lot of press. When did he first come on your radar?
Believe it or not, quite early, as a matter of fact. I first saw Scott Hall in the AWA back in, probably 85, I think. '86, when he and Kurt Hennig, of course, the future Mr. Perfect, were the AWA Tag Team Champions. I would say it was probably '85. I think they were tag champions because I think it was probably by late '86, early '87 that Kurt Hennig had started feuding with Bockwinkel for the world title. So I remember first seeing Scott Hall probably like 1985 in the AWA when he was teaming with Kurt Hennig and had the big mustache. Then I kind of lost my radar for a little bit. I saw him, I guess, briefly on Crockett when he was Starship Eagle. I think he was teaming with. I think he was tag teaming with Dan Spivey. Yeah, as the Starships or whatever the heck their name was. Then he kind of faded a bit. I think he did some indie stuff, and then it was probably 1991 when everybody really caught look of him when he was the Diamond Stud in WCW in 91 with 91 with and early 92 with DDP with Diamond Dallas Page. There was a rumor I read somewhere that he may have been thought of to join the Dangerous Alliance, but that did not come to pass. And then he eventually, I think, just left quietly in the spring of '92. And then, of course, we all saw him that summer. And then in the fall of '92, he obviously debuted in the WWF as Razor Ramon. But I first saw him, Dave, as far back as 1985, I think, early '86. Because we used to get where I lived here in Connecticut, we used to get the AWA like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think a couple times a week on ESPN. So I got like my 2-hour AWA fix because, back then you'll take anything, good or bad. When you're a kid, if there's two guys beating each other up in a ring, I watched it. So, so that's probably where I first saw him, was probably '85 in AWA. Was it that early for you?
No, we didn't get AWA down here. As I said, I started getting into PWI in 1988, and at that time Scott Hall, I think, was down in Florida. So you'd see his name pop up in the names making news or the the ring results section. The first time I saw Scott Hall in the ring was the 1989 Great American Bash, because he was in the 2-ring battle royal that night.
Yep.
For got pretty well no focus, but when you go back and watch it again, you see him there. So that's the first time I saw him. His Diamond Stud run was actually something I encountered after his debut in the WWF. So because of the way some of the videos came out down here in Australia, he'd already moved into the Razor Ramon character in the WWF when I got to see those few late '91 wrestling videos from WCW down here in Australia when he was Diamond Stud. So I remember seeing it going, that's Razor Ramon. And he had the toothpick and he had this. So for those people, go back we go back to '96 where, Vince wants to sue WCW because of, stealing characters or whatever. He had the toothpick, he had the hair, he had the swagger in late '91 as the Diamond Stud. But yeah, no, look, obviously, really it was his arrival in WWF in late '92. And I guess from my perspective, you could tell Vince and WWF had big things planned for Scott from the moment he arrived, because he was immediately put in the ring with Randy Savage. And when he debuted and when they're doing the vignettes, Randy Savage was the world champion. So we're not talking about a guy who was coming in, worked the way up the card and all that. He came straight into I don't think I've ever known anyone to come in, apart from maybe Ric Flair. I don't think anyone has ever come in such a prominent position, because he was lined up calling out the world champion, costs the world champion his title, and is immediately booked in a series of matches with Randy Savage, culminating in the tag match at Survivor Series 92. So it's a big arrival. It's a big push right from the outset. They obviously had, they had big things in plan for him from the moment he turned up.
Yeah, I remember I was when the vignettes came up. I was just starting my I was in the summer '92, so I was just starting my sophomore year in college. And I remember actually it was when that fall. I actually first met Dr. G. We met in college in '92, and when I first started hanging out in his dorm, his roommate, who kind of liked wrestling, but he was from the islands, he had and I'll never forget it. He had a PWI article that said, and you're talking about the Savage thing. It said, "Quien es más macho," and that was it was a split picture, and it was macho. It was Randy Savage and Razor Ramon, and I'm like, wow, they're really pushing this guy to the moon, huh? Because and like you mentioned, Ric Flair, and even that's a separate case because Flair's Flair. By then he was one of the best in the world, and multi-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion. So he was already like up there when he came to the WWF. He wasn't going to have to crawl up the ladder. His first feud was with Piper. So Razor, Scott Hall was just kind of coasting through the mid card throughout his career.
Well, not even mid card. He was probably lower mid card. Like he was a nobody.
Yeah, tags. He's in matches with Oz. We all know who Oz is, and we'll bring that guy up multiple times this evening, because he was in kind of the same boat. But the minute you saw Razor Ramon in the WWF, the first thing you said to yourself was, "That's a guy Vince Vince likes. He's big dude." Big chest, big hairy chest, and big dude with a bravado. And he was, you see the vignettes on like the Scott Hall DVD, and Vince is telling him how to walk and act like, they're pretty much acting like Vince. But that was, you could tell the minute he came to the WWF, that was a guy that Vince was going to strap a rocket to. But was it going to be a guy that Vince would strap the complete rocket to? And that's something we'll talk about this evening when we go through the glass, because he liked the character of Razor. But what I really want to talk about tonight is, what was it about Razor that Vince didn't think could be that next tick to main event world championship status? What was it about Scott Hall or the Razor Ramon character that fell just short of being a world champion? And that's what we're hopefully going to attempt to break down tonight, is to figure out how much Vince loved that gimmick, but what was just missing that didn't propel him to that next level. Was it his fellow Clique member, Shawn Michaels? Was it another Clique member that we'll talk about tonight? It's very interesting because, again, you look at Scott Hall, and he was totally a Vince guy, but why was he not the Vince guy? That's, I think, one thing that's a question that we will attempt, Dave, to answer this evening.
Yeah, so. Yeah. It's certainly a really good thing to look at that question, because, when, like we said, he comes in, he's going against Macho. He's teaming with Ric Flair at the Royal Rumble, so he hasn't even been in the company 4 months. Royal Rumble 93, he's got a world title shot against Bret Hart. He was rocketing along. You sort of, it would have been way too early to ever consider giving him a run at that point. Bret had just moved into that role. They were wanting to head in that direction of giving Bret the run. Mm-hmm. So I don't think Scott was ever. I always was of the opinion that the the Scott Hall Bret Hart match at the Royal Rumble was a card placement thing. It was because they weren't wanting to give Ric Flair the rematch, because there was really, I don't think, anyone else high enough on the card who would be considered a viable challenger to Bret Hart for that sort of first. It's his second title defense, but I mean the Shawn Michaels one at Survivor Series 92 had been announced before he was champion, so I don't sort of consider that an earned shot. Sort of, this is the first going against a recognized contender. I think that he was the only person who was probably at the level that people would have accepted as a viable challenger at such an event. And then from there, he goes through, sort of, he drops back down the card slightly as the Backlund match at Mania. Then the whole 1, 2, 3 kid storyline, and he's turned face. And I think, that, it was very clear that the fans liked what they were seeing, because even at WrestleMania 9, they were cheering him against Backlund. So there was something about Scott Hall, about Razor, that clicked with the fans very early on. I always liked him from when he came in. There was something about him. He carried, I think, the way he carried himself, even going straight for Savage, I think it allowed him to be accepted because of how he carried himself, because he had the swagger, because he talked about oozing machismo, and he was a big, talented guy. He wasn't a hack in the ring. I think all that helped the cause to be accepted as someone who was up there, but it probably went too far, because I think that it started to get one of those early Austin impacts. I call it the Austin impact, when the fans turn you, because he was enjoyable to watch. He was fun to watch. You knew what you were getting with him, but you knew you were going to be entertained. So I think that always he was someone who got the fans interested in what he was doing, whether he was a heel or a face. So I think that was something that worked in his favor a lot of the time.
Yeah, and one thing I think that we're going to mention a lot tonight is there was always one guy in the way.
Yeah.
That Vince looked at as a better heel. Because Scott Hall, and maybe this is to his credit, and I'm looking forward to us kind of really diving into this aspect of it. I think Vince was not concerned about his getting over with the fans. That wasn't the problem. That was most definitely going to happen. I think what was concerning Vince for Scott Hall was, as Razor Ramon, is that he was going to split the crowd. And Bret was his guy. He loved Bret, but I think his concern was that Bret would not be as over as he would want him to be in a feud like that, because Scott Hall was slowly getting over with the crowd, say by April or May. And obviously the whole 1, 2, 3 kid thing, and then the making fun of, DiBiase kind of making fun of him, and then the slow burn leading to the pretty much total face turn in the summer 93, leading to him beating DiBiase at SummerSlam. Vince realized this guy is getting cheers. I think we just need to fully pull the trigger and turn him babyface. So I think that was one thing that seemed to have been hindering Scott Hall at that moment, was his connection with the crowd, to the point of, well, if he's going to be a heel against Bret, we may end up getting the crowd split. As much as everybody loves Bret, and particularly at that time, 92, 93, into 94, Bret was Bret over enough that he could have kind of swallowed all of the babyface pops against a guy like Razor Ramon? Or was Razor getting slowly over with the fans that the crowd might have been a little split? Maybe they noticed something during that Rumble 93 match that Vince said, well, he's getting a few cheers, and people kind of dig his bravado. People also, I think, dug the different colors, because a lot of wrestlers back then, Dave, didn't have like multiple kits. Everybody had one color. Like Brett was, Shawn did, but Brett was pretty much purple and black, or purple and black, pink and black, purple and black. I'm thinking of purple because Scott Hall wore purple. He wore red,
green.
He wore yellow, he wore green, he wore blue, he wore black.
He did. He was very he was very colorful, and I think it added to his presentation. It really did stand him out. And when he was on the run as the IC champion, some of the pictures, and I know they did this a lot with Warrior. They were changing the belt color and all that, but there were some pictures out there. He'd have his vest, he'd have his belt, and he'd have his trunks and his vest with whatever color they were going. And sometimes the leather on the strap of the belt was of that similar sort of color matching. So they played it up. They did play it up, and I think that's certainly an element that had a good impact.
Yeah. I think the other. Well, how do you want to, before we just start going all over, why don't we, what do you want to focus on first? Let's pick a spot and kind of,
well, I think if we keep heading down the WWE line, I think, like you said, there was a key thing that you mentioned before, and that's that there always seemed to be someone else in front of him. There was always someone that he never seemed to be the number one. He was always the number two. So he became IC champ. He was, the number two babyface on the card until Shawn Michaels turned babyface. And then he was, so the number three. There's always someone ahead of him in whatever happened. And I think in the early run, he proved himself as an IC champ. He certainly really, made that title prominent and respected, and he had a good run. But throughout that sort of 93, 94, 95, there was always someone else above him. He was probably never looked at as a world champion before then. You had your Yoko run. You go back to Brett. They wanted to give. I guess there's the interesting question. I guess there is what happened with Diesel. I guess the question to ask is, could Razor or Scott Hall ever have been considered for the run that Diesel got? Maybe that's the first place to start. What is it about Diesel? What is it about Razor? Could that run of Diesel have been a Razor Ramon run, or was it that just not really a feasible option at that time?
That's a great question, because if you look back, and I'm curious everyone's thoughts, and please comment on our Place to Be Facebook page, comment on our Twitter at PTBN Wrestling, because I'm curious everyone else's thoughts, what they think about this specific question. What was it about Diesel that Vince liked more than Razor in mid to late 94? Because let's not forget that Diesel was very over as a heel. He was getting some pops, and if you go back as far back as the 94 Rumble in Providence, and JR can tell you this, Diesel was crazy over. And then it kind of faded because he was going to get fired, Diesel, in the end of 93. And he saved his job with that 94 Rumble performance. However, I still feel like beginning of 94, Razor was crazy over as a babyface. He gets this epic match against Shawn Michaels in arguably one of the most historically amazing matches, of all time at WrestleMania 10 against Shawn with the ladder match. And he's crazy over there. I mean, he falls, he does the Razor shimmy, holding the two belts. I mean, he was the man on that March night at Madison Square Garden. And then you go through the summer, he loses the title in, I think it was June, to Diesel. They do that build. And then at SummerSlam,
and that was still really a follow-up. Like, while Diesel was given the run, that was still, to me, it was always like it was an offshoot, a follow-on of the Razor Michaels feud. It wasn't. I didn't look at that as part of the Diesel push at the time. I looked at it more as this is a back play to the Michaels Ramon ongoing. So very much like what you got in ECW with Tommy Dreamer and Raven. All these sudden things would offshoot, but the underlying story was always Raven. That's what I felt the Diesel. Well, that's what I felt when it first started. That it really was just, this is about about Razor and Shawn. Shawn's now got his buddy, his bodyguard into the title picture, and they've managed to steal the title back. That was how I felt about that one.
Right. They have this epic match at SummerSlam 94, Walter Payton, Chicago, everything's great. And I felt like at that point, Razor had graduated from the IC picture. And at some point over the next, 2 or 3 months in that fall of 94, Razor was going to be elevated to the main event and win the world title at some point in the fall of 94. Now, Brett was champion, feuding with Owen. We all know how great that feud was. Diesel and Shawn win the tag titles from the Head Shrinkers the night before, or 2 nights before, I think it was, SummerSlam 94, which made no sense at all. Then Diesel loses the IC belt to Razor. And then I thought at some point Razor would lose the IC belt to somebody, maybe back to Diesel, and then Razor,
or even back to Shawn,
and then Diesel, Razor would be the one that. So it's almost,
especially when they were teasing the Michaels Diesel tension even at the SummerSlam, because Michaels cost Diesel the belt, so you could see that maybe they wanted to put the IC belt on back on Shawn, and he and Diesel could have had a little bit of a headlong battle over that while Razor moved up the card.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Now, going back a year, let's clarify this, because we just started talking about it. Could Razor have been instead of putting Razor in the match at Rumble 93 with Brett, why not Brett take on another heel in the company, have Razor win the Rumble, and you have Brett Razor at WrestleMania 9 and Razor wins? What was it between November and January of 90, between November of 92 and January of 93, Vince saw something in Yokozuna where he was the better heel? Probably true. Again, like I said earlier, I think the Razor was still getting some face pops even as early as January or February of 93. And I think if you wanted a legit heel, Yoko was the better option at that moment.
I think the other thing to bring into that consideration is you need to ask the question of how early did negotiations start with Hulk Hogan to come back for WrestleMania 9? Because I wonder if that tied into the decision of where they were going as well. Because with Hogan coming back, it made sense that you want the Hogan Yoko thing because that fits Hogan's character. That fits the way they do storylines with Hulk Hogan, the whole Yokozuna thing. Whereas if they weren't negotiating with Hulk Hogan, if Hulk Hogan wasn't coming back, perhaps Razor getting the win, like you said, could have been an option.
Right. But yeah, the fact Hogan was coming back kind of threw everything off, and Hogan Razor, like that wouldn't have made any sense. I agree with you 100% on that. Dave, I don't think that would have worked. So let's fast forward ahead to 94, and we get through the fall. Razor's crazy over, and you think to yourself, well, maybe this is the time now. Maybe he has graduated from the IC belt. We'll drop it at some point in the fall. And now it's time for the trigger to be pulled on Razor as champion. So do you just kind of put Razor in the Diesel slot? You still have Bob Backlund beat Brett at the 94 Survivor Series with the whole Owen thing. And instead of having Diesel go to the Garden, you have Razor go to the Garden. Razor beats Backlund in 20 seconds with a Razor's Edge and wins the title.
I think
is it? Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
No, you go. Finish.
No, I was just going to say, is it that easy? I'll ask you. Maybe what you're about to say is going to answer my question. Is it that simple to flip flop Razor and Diesel in those slots? Is it that easy?
I think it is. I think that you've explained it perfectly. Razor was over big time. We all know that Diesel's run did not have the success that they wanted. I think part of it is the way it felt so hot-shotted that he just turned face. Like, SummerSlam, he was still a heel. He was getting popular, but he was getting popular because he was having the tension and the building tension with Shawn. And everyone loves the whole, he's being held down. Let's break him away. Let's have him feud. Everyone wanted to see that. I don't know if everyone wanted to see Diesel into the title picture, into the world title. I think it is as simple as what you said. The belt comes off Razor over, before Survivor Series. Maybe you have Shawn steal it, get a win back, and that can help build the tension with Diesel and Shawn. But Razor going into that championship run, I think it would have been better received. I think it would have had more fan acceptance, and it opens up the doors for what would have been, I think, much more enjoyable main events over the following year. I mean, whether they wanted to continue, you could have done anything coming out of there. You didn't have to push the Shawn to win the Rumble that year. I think that was probably a year early. But I think Razor would have absolutely knocked it out of the park if he had been given the run in that 94, the post Survivor Series 94, because they wanted to take it off Brett for a while. They were doing it anyway, right? And so they didn't want Backlund to run with the belt. Razor would have been a perfect choice.
I don't see how he couldn't. The fans dug him. He was crazy over. I mean, were they nervous of the mid card? Because let's be honest, the roster was not very thick at that time in 95. Vince was, the struggles were there. Everyone argues November 94 to November 95 might be one of the worst years the first really bad year in the history of the company. But I still think that if you put Diesel as IC champion, maybe you do a build to Shawn and Diesel at WrestleMania for the IC title and have Razor perhaps go against Yoko at WrestleMania 11. Remember, WrestleMania 11, you could pretty much put anything anywhere because they were obviously pimping Bam Bam and LT as the main event. So if you didn't have to worry about the world title being the big deal as the main event of that show, then be perfectly comfortable with having a Razor Ramon WWF World Title match against somebody, and maybe have for the second straight year have Shawn with an IC title match, this time against Diesel. Maybe Shawn is the champion going into WrestleMania 11, and Diesel as the babyface beats him. Then you get to the build to Shawn as a babyface, eventually leading to 96, and then everything in 96 with Brett and him and the Iron Man and all that. I think that's something you could still do. So we're not sitting here going, all right, just throw, throw flip-flop Diesel and Razor and everything's fine. No, you definitely have to do some tweaking. I mean, I wouldn't keep the world title on Backlund that long. You could, that would be kind of fascinating because let's be honest, Brett, I would have no problem having Brett and Owen wrestle a second straight year. I mean, the question you'd ask yourself, Dave, and let me ask you this. How hard is it to rebook WrestleMania 11 to cater to Razor Ramon as world champion? I feel like it's not that hard since they were really focusing on a celebrity match with Bam Bam and LT. You could jiggle the rest of that card. I mean, Jesus, the show is in Hartford. I mean, I live here. I wouldn't put a WrestleMania in Hartford. But, they were in that moment where they kind of had to, go on the cheap side a little bit. So really you could do whatever you want on that Mania and get away with it because you were going to put LT and Bam Bam Bigelow last anyway. Yeah. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And there were options. I mean, I think Razor as champion, his work rate in the ring, his ability to put on good matches, proven to this point in his WWE. And he had good matches with Diesel. He could pull a good match out of people. You could have done something like, you could have put Owen in that spot. You could have put. You could have had a rematch with Backlund. Not that I would have gone down that line, but whether it be Yokozuna, whether it be all sorts of. I think he's the sort of guy you could have probably done anyone, and he would have made it work. I think he would have made it work. He would have made it interesting. He would have made it match. I mean, I'm picturing an Owen Hart Razor Ramon match for the title as part of Owen's quest to be better than his brother. I mean, the storyline they did at WrestleMania 11 was Owen went, I'm going to do what my brother did. I'm going to win a tag title. Well, why couldn't they have just done Owen do what his brother did, win the Rumble and go into Mania and then lose? It would have been just as, I think there's a lot of options there and he would have made, I think the big thing is he would have made it work. It was not a far fetch. It would have been enjoyable to watch. And I think that the fans would have been in on it because the longer term arc was always going to be bringing it back to Brett later in the year. I think that arc, you could still have carried that arc, and Razor would have, it would have worked. But in between, we wouldn't have had to have put up with. I don't think we would have had to have put up with, Sid and Mabel and all the crap that went on with them. You could have put some of the other guys. Sean could have had a match post Mania. You could have done the SummerSlam match. You could have done Sean and Razor at SummerSlam. You could have done Razor and, you probably would have got a Razor Taker match in there. You could have done another Razor Diesel match. You could have done all sorts of options, and it would have been, you would have had matches that don't have people looking back 20, 30 years later going, that's one of the worst matches of all time.
Yep. I don't know if I would have. Well, it works out that we didn't get Razor Taker because we wouldn't have got the streak, because I don't think Taker would have won the belt at that point. Although Taker, Razor, anything better than Taker Bundy, but at that time Vince didn't really value Taker's use or value him, and that might be a good future. Looking glass, rebooking some of Taker's better early opponents, because probably, except for maybe Diesel at 12 and maybe Sid at 13, a lot of Taker's opponents at WrestleMania have had early on were, left a lot to be desired until we got to probably, obviously Kane. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. Because would you do Brett? I think Brett winning the Rumble and having Brett Razor for the title, with Razor retaining in a great match.
Sean could work. Yeah.
It could work. You still do Sean Diesel, except it'll be for the Intercontinental title. And then everything else would kind of, you put Backlund against somebody. If you even put him in at all. And then maybe do, the Owen Yoko thing with the smoking guns and then everything else and all that, the rest of the card kind of falls into place. You find something for Jeff Jarrett. I don't know. Maybe you do Jarrett and Owen as a tag team and then save Yoko, because I think Yoko, if Yoko was told that he was going to get, say, a better future in 1995, then maybe he wouldn't have gotten so big and kind of lost his standing in the company. I don't know. But I think the two or three best opponents, I think at that moment for Razor, if he was world champion, would have been Owen, Brett, or Yoko, depending if Yoko stuck around. Now, here's the question too, Dave. If we're booking this kind of arc from the fall of 94 into WrestleMania 11, we're just assuming that we stick Diesel in that, Razor in that slot at Madison Square Garden in November when he beats Bob Backlund in 25 seconds or whatever. Now, do we keep Bob Backlund as champion all the way to WrestleMania 11 and Razor wins the Rumble? Would that have had enough legs? Or do you not even bother? Do you switch up WrestleMania, the 94 Survivor Series? Because here's where the dominoes may come into play here. Is Bob Backlund a strong enough character and a strong enough guy creatively that he could have beaten Brett at the 94 Survivor Series and held the title all the way to WrestleMania 11, and then lose to Razor as Razor wins the Royal Rumble. Maybe they do a storyline where, can you beat me again? You beat me 2 years ago at WrestleMania. Can you beat me again? And then start wrenching his arms or something like. That's the only difference. We may have to switch that up because I don't know if Bob Backlund would have been a strong enough heel champion from November 94 all the way to April of 95 to where he could have lasted as a credible heel for Razor to beat at WrestleMania 11. So there's the first question. Does Razor just slide into Diesel's slot at the Garden and beat Bob Backlund in 20 seconds and go into WrestleMania as champion? Or do you find another heel for Brett to lose to so Razor wins the Rumble in Tampa and then beats the heel at WrestleMania? That's the two scenarios that we have to think about. I'm not sure if Bob Backlund's a strong enough heel to be able to carry from November 94 all the way to WrestleMania 11. What do you think?
I agree with that statement. I don't think Backlund could carry the title to Mania. You could have considered maybe holding a title switch off to the Rumble and maybe have Razor as the number one contender, especially as he was champion at Survivor Series. That gives you time to take the belt off him and put him in a number one contender's role. The only issue you have in all that is the desire of the fans to have Brett get his rematch. And that's the one thing that I think, the one spanner that flies into any of that is the longer you keep Bob Backlund as champion, the more the desire would be, well, hang on, Brett didn't lose the title. Brett should have another shot. Brett didn't, it wasn't fair. Brett didn't submit. He didn't get pinned. We all, so I think the fans would have been sitting there going, well, if Brett's in the ring and Brett's healthy, then why is Brett not getting the rematch? I think that you could have tried to come up with a storyline that Backlund maybe refused to wrestle Brett at the Rumble, and so Razor gets in as the number one contender. That I think could have been an option. I would not have gone any longer than that, and maybe winning the title at the Royal Rumble would have been a good arc, a good way to make that transition and to allow it to play out. It certainly would have gone over well. I do think that perhaps just putting him into the spot of winning it a couple of days later, so you don't have to deal with that, doing the Madison Square Garden thing that they did might be the better option. Just put Razor into that spot, let them do the title. It doesn't have to be a 25-second squash. It could be anything. But I think the longer you keep the title on Backlund, number one, it was always viewed as a fluke. I don't think Backlund was ever viewed as a genuine champion. I know as a fan myself, I looked at Backlund as, Brett defended the title against anyone. He was giving anyone and everyone a shot. That was the gimmick of Bret Hart's world title run. Everyone got an opportunity, and Backlund, it just sort of came across as this was just another one of those, and it just so happened that Owen played into it and you had the title loss. But if you kept it on Backlund, once Brett's back in action, all you're going to want to see is Brett get the rematch. Mm-hmm. So I think they need to get the title off Backlund as quick as possible. And whether that be Madison Square Garden or find a way to have Razor in the spot at the Rumble without sacrificing Bret Hart's the credibility of why is Bret Hart not getting the rematch. That's I think as far as you could have gone.
Yeah, Bret. It's kind of sad to say this, but Bret kind of throws a fly in the ointment here because you have now too many baby faces. And I mean, you could still maybe you have Diesel and not Diesel, Razor and Backlund at the 95 Rumble. Have Brett cost Backlund the title. Then you don't want an impure Razor win. No, you don't want that either. No, that wouldn't work. No, that wouldn't work. Yeah, that's the key thing is what are you going to do about Brett? Thank you, Brett. Yeah, that's the weird thing because you want to kind of give Razor a clear path. Now, you could think about Razor later in the year. He wins King of the Ring. Maybe you let Diesel win it the way he wins it. Maybe he loses the title to, say, Owen Hart. And then you have Razor win the King of the Ring. We skip all this Mabel crap. And we have Owen and Razor at SummerSlam. And then maybe you have Jarrett and Shawn at SummerSlam. And you give the Jarrett-Shawn match that you would have had it in your house too, you have it at SummerSlam. So we could think about a second scenario where we kind of let Razor do his thing, stay IC champion, feud with Jarrett, let Diesel do his thing, have Diesel lose to Owen at King of the Ring, Razor wins King of the Ring, and then the next night on Raw, WWF President Gorilla Monsoon announces that the King of the Ring was actually for the number one contender, and at SummerSlam, we will have Razor Ramon against whoever the WWF champion is at that time, in this case, Owen Hart. Then you do a typical, like, secondary pay-per-view tag. You do, like, Razor, I don't know, maybe Razor Shawn against Owen Jarrett or something like that. You know, the two big SummerSlam matches in a tag. You know, Vince didn't give a shit about those secondary pay-per-views. They were only $15 anyway. So, you know, you throw any match in there in these secondary shows and set up for SummerSlam in Pittsburgh. And instead of all that instead of all that Mabel garbage, you get Razor Owen and Shawn Jarrett. Because you knew Shawn and Jarrett had good chemistry, because that In Your House 2 match is awesome.
Mm.
And maybe you hold off a little bit in 95 and have Razor win the world title at SummerSlam instead of before WrestleMania. That might be an easier scenario, because I think then, because I know we both have Brett in our heads and we're kind of haggling over that. I feel like we can smooth the Brett thing over by the time we hit SummerSlam, then after Survivor Series into WrestleMania. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it certainly makes it easier. I think the problem with it, though, is, in my mind, something seemed to happen to Razor after he didn't get pushed up, maybe at that point, like we were talking about in late 94. Mm-hmm. And you know, when you get to that sort of 95, that WrestleMania, you know, that WrestleMania time period, the shine is off Razor. The Razor has dropped in importance. The whole you know, starting to deal with the Jarretts and the Gold Dusts and all that, there was something about that seemed like Razor. He was always prominent, and he could have easily transitioned back, but the shine had gone off him in some way, and I don't think he had the prominent. I don't think he was as over in later in the year in that SummerSlam time period that he was the previous Survivor Series. That time period. I don't know. That's just how I feel. I think that if it doesn't happen in that time period that we're talking about, when instead of doing the run instead of Diesel, I think the longer it goes, the shine, the less accepted it would have been, because the Bret Hart. I mean, I guess we come back to Bret. Bret continued to. The ball was rolling under him. He was viewed as the more legitimate person. Hadn't lost the run. He was always in that spot. Undertaker was starting to gain more legitimacy as the upper card guy, as the guy that, I always feel Undertaker should have been in a more prominent role than he was all that time. And then you've got Shawn Michaels' face turn and Shawn Michaels' momentum building as well. So I really feel Razor gets lost in the shuffle the later in the year you push it. And I don't think it would have been as accepted as it would have been late 93. All
right,
90.
I got an idea. This just popped into my head. Let me know what you think of this. Let's get Backlund out altogether. As much as Backlund was an awesome heel, let's get Backlund out altogether. How about Owen beats Bret at the 94 Survivor Series? Owen finally gets his big win, beats his brother. We can have some kind of cheating there.
Well, it could be a similar circumstance to what we had. Backlund could have been his second. They could have done the whole tower. They could have done the exact same finish with Owen as the recipient.
And then Owen and Bret could have one more rematch at the Rumble. Another schmaz that helps Owen win. Razor wins the Rumble. And you could still get Bret Backlund at WrestleMania 11, and Owen walks in as champion, and Razor beats him.
That works.
That works.
That works. I think that works big time. I think it plays a lot of things. Again, you would have wanted Razor to win the Rumble, which I think would have been a very reasonable and accepted outcome, especially that Rumble when really you only had two guys in it that were going to win it. One was Yoko, who did win it, and the other one was Mr. Perfect, who they got out early so they didn't have to have him in at the end. I think that I think you're very much looking at I'm thinking the year before, sorry, but no, Razor I think would have been an acceptable winner. That would work. That scenario works. I think it builds because it allows Razor to continue to build the momentum into a Mania win, and getting that win at Mania would be a big thing. It would have continued to launch him, and I think it would have given him the basis for a great reign. Probably, yeah, you're probably still looking at a similar end to it, probably that Diesel had, that bringing Bret finally gets, a shot. Well, Razor gives Bret the shot, I'm not the champ until I've beaten you, sort of thing. And maybe Bret wins it back and to set up, or you have him keep it for 12 months and then he loses it to Shawn. And this would work because you're building Shawn up over that 12-month period. Shawn's ready for his run the following year. Imagine if it was Shawn and Razor, the rematch, not this time, not in a ladder, but in the Iron Man match. And Razor can do the whole, I beat you 2 years ago, I'm going to beat you again, I'm going to do it again. And then Shawn gets his win. And I think you would have you'd have a legit passing of the torch moment as well, because you could picture, because they're mates, number one, that because they're really good friends, they're going to go out, put on the classics that they always do. And this is not taking anything away from Sean and Brett's match, although I think Sean and Razor would have probably thrown in a few results through it. You wouldn't have had the 1 hour draw. I think you would have had the, a 5 pins to 4 or 5 victories to 4 sort of thing scenario. And Razor shakes his hand afterwards, raises his hand in the air, points at, this is the champ. Here he is, guys. He beat me. He's my friend. And off into the sunset, Razor goes, and Sean launches his championship run. I think that works. That really does work.
Yeah, and I think, and no disrespect to Brett, we're not disrespecting Brett here by any stretch. We're just kind of come up with a scenario where, and listen, Brett hated that run anyway. He didn't like being the throwaway champion, that beat Diesel at Survivor Series 95. Admittedly, you have a subpar match with him and Taker at the 96 Rumble, which we all know is not one of either of those guys' best matches. I mean, the cage match with Diesel at In Your House 6 is good. It's not great. It's good. And then the Iron Man. So, and Brett always said that he couldn't stand that run anyway. So we book it like this, where Diesel has a solid run throughout 95, and you build other guys up, and maybe as well, Dave, we might be hurting WCW, because if Diesel and Razor are happy about their standing in the company, I know that they liked the hours. That's more what Scott Hall would say in later interviews. But if they're at the top of the card, maybe they don't leave in 96 for WCW, and things don't work out the way they planned for Eric Bischoff. Because Diesel may eventually want to run, but that hasn't happened yet. So perhaps Kevin Nash sticks around in 96.
Well,
while
you
Shawn
really
is champion.
Yeah, you build a lot of options there, because maybe they stick around because Shawn is champion, and then they hold off the Diesel. Maybe Diesel takes the place of Sid at the end of the year and gets the win at that back end of the year, and gets a short reign, sharing the belt with Shawn. I think it does create, if especially Razor, if Razor's had a 12-month run as world champion, which is what we've just proposed, he's making that top of the card money, which, part of the talk is, you said it was the hours, and the other part was they wanted some more money. Razor certainly would have been making the money. Diesel may not have, and you still may have had Diesel considering the move, but you certainly are probably looking at Razor, and Razor could probably have come off that world title run and had a couple of months off. Had similar to what Brett did, have a couple of months off, rest, recuperate, and then come back later in the year as, refreshed and ready to go. I think, it would have had them reconsidering their standing with the company.
And then you could have Razor perhaps wanting a title shot back. Maybe Razor returns heel.
Yes.
In 96. And he beats up Shawn, and they have a feud, and, you somehow get that kind of scenario going and eventually get Brett back into the picture. Maybe you don't think about this. Maybe you don't even need Sid to come back in 96, because his 95 run is, look, and no one's a bigger Sid fan than I am, but that 95 run is absolute garbage. Those matches are shit. Now, could you have Razor and Sid at In Your House 1 and at the the lumberjack match at In Your House 2, would they have been better with Razor? Maybe, because Razor is a little bit of a different worker than Diesel was. Scott's a little smaller. He could do a little more kind of maneuvering than Diesel could, than Kevin Nash could. So perhaps, you could still have Sid sticking around. The problem was, and this has been said even in the real world, at the back end of 96, you're loaded with main eventers. And then another guy whose name we still got to mention is Vader. He eventually comes in. You got another massive heel. So you have all these giant heels, all these giant faces. It's amazing. The problem was the mid-card in WWF in 96 was just very barren because you had all these guys at the top of the card. So it's really fascinating how we got to this point. Now, maybe, regardless of whether they were champions or not, maybe Diesel and Razor, Scott and Kevin, wanted to go to WCW anyway, just because they heard that the schedule's better and they'll get paid more guaranteed money and they want a vacation and that kind of shit. And maybe that was just part of their thing at that point, whether they were champion or not.
Yeah. The other thing you've got to work into that whole equation is that late 95, early 96 is when Razor's personal issues started to become a problem.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, we haven't talked about that.
And look, we've sort of left that out of the conversation, but I do think when you come to the 96 and the staying around, whether you stay, whether you go, I wouldn't have been surprised if Razor had the run on top. He still probably got the demon issues. It would have been coming out of that run that Vince probably would have been saying, you've got to deal with this. Mm-hmm. And Razor probably, having just had the run he's had, is sitting there going, you know what? Number one, I don't want to deal with it. Number two, you're going to take me off the road means I'm not going to make any money. And he might have been, that might have led to him going, well, if you're going to put me off because of this, I'm going to go elsewhere where I can get paid. Right. So even that concept alone might have been enough to have him entertain offers elsewhere.
Right. So that's something else we haven't talked about. Now, let's say that maybe, obviously at the end of 95, beginning of 96, Razor was a champion. He was the Intercontinental Champion because, of course, he would end up losing the IC belt to Goldust at the Rumble. But if he's world champion, does he realize, Kev, maybe the Click guys around him are like, listen, you gotta lay off this shit. If you're going to be a world champion, Vince is going to expect you to be 100%. You can't be fucking around. This isn't the 70s and 80s where, Harley Race could pound a fucking case of Milwaukee's Best and then go out and do 60 minutes with Dusty Rhodes. This isn't 1979. This is different now. And Vince doesn't go for that crap. So, I'm curious then if it's a different belt. When he was IC champ, whatever, I'm IC champ, whatever. I could still go out there and goof off for 15 minutes on a match. But if you're world champion, you can't be having substandard slop, which is pretty much what happened to Diesel in the fall of 95, the infamous, the In Your House, what would it be? I guess it would have been In Your House 4 match with British Bulldog, which is an absolute pile of crap. And Vince supposedly just screamed at Diesel in front of everybody when the cameras went off the air that you're tanking my company because you suck. And, now whether that happened or not, who knows? But if Razor was champion in that stretch in late 95 and he is clean enough, I guess, let's go that far, enough, that maybe he gets away with it. We get to WrestleMania. He has a killer Iron Man with Shawn, passes the torch, passes the world title. Something tells me, Dave, just based on how both Kevin and Scott are, I think they would have left anyway.
Yeah.
I think
there's a good chance.
Yeah. I think they would have left anyway and said, listen, Vince, thank you for this amazing run. You got a lot of guys here. I need a better schedule. My body's tired. I can't deal with this 310 days a year shit. Down south, they're offering me more money in less days. I know you can't match it right now. So I'm ready. No disrespect to you. Thank you. I got to go. And if Vince said, okay, put over Shawn one more, do exactly like Diesel, put Shawn over in a rematch in your house, Good Friend. I mean, maybe they'll come up with a better title than Good Friends, Better Enemies, but, and then that's it. And then Razor and Diesel are gone. That part of the storyline doesn't change. Both those guys go to WCW and we get the NWO, etc. And Shawn goes on his way and, feuds at Vader and yada, yada, yada. And everything is pretty much the same as we have in the real world. But I think the best option, and I think we is what we just discussed, where maybe, Owen finally wins his world title, beats Bret at the Survivor Series. Backlund's the second. We get a Bret Owen rematch at the 95 Rumble. And no one can say, oh, well, how many pay-per-view matches they're going to have? Well, shit. 1995 alone, Bret and Diesel wrestled 3 times. Then you count the 94 King of the Ring. And why wouldn't we want more Bret Owen matches? I mean, Jesus. Give me that every month,
Absolutely.
And then Razor wins the world title at WrestleMania 11. The crowd is pumped about it. You don't have to worry about losing any buzz in the arena because you were totally predicating WrestleMania 11 on Bam Bam and LT, so you don't really give a crap about the rest of the undercard because whatever happens, happens. And you go through 95, and Diesel, Razor has some great matches with whoever. And then we get to 96, and he's the one that puts over Shawn in the Iron Man in Anaheim. And I honestly think, and I got to be honest, JR and I have said this, and again, this is another topic for another day. I personally, maybe it's because we've watched better Iron Man matches since, I have never thought that Iron Man match has aged well. Because I think both Triple H and Rock at Judgment Day 2000 and the SmackDown match in 2003 between Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle are both better Iron Man matches than that is.
Yeah.
So maybe with none of the bullshit of them hating each other underlying the surface, that Razor and Shawn end up having a pretty good Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12 because there's no underlying shoot stuff of I'm not letting this asshole pin me bullshit that the two of them did. Which gave us 60 minutes of boredom, except for a couple of cool super kicks and some other, Shawn super kicking the fucking timekeeper guy and the last minute in the sharpshooter. But that middle, 40 minutes is drudge.
Yeah.
It's drudge. So, that might be kind of a hot take because I know as much of a hot take as Sean Kidd hating Savage vs. Steamboat from WrestleMania 3, I have slowly started losing my liking as a matter of fact, it wasn't in my GWWE Top 100. I did not put the Iron Man from WrestleMania 12 because it just hasn't aged well. I
think that's what I think you hit on the key there is the fact that we've seen better ones. We've seen ways it can be done that make it more palatable. You can go an hour. You don't need to have the draw. And I think a lot of people have sort of said the fact that when you sort of hit the 30-minute mark, you knew you weren't going to get anything after that until the finish. Whereas, Hunter and Rock put on a great one in 30 minutes. The Brock Angle one is outstanding. I always like that one. I always liked some of the spots in that, like the whole I'm going to get disqualified by using this chair so that I can then immediately get a pin back because he's out cold because I've just knocked him out. Right. And I could probably get a second one as well. So the psychology behind it was very good. So, yeah, I think that if they had I feel that if they had announced that the match was just going to be a 60-minute time limit match and they'd gone to a 60-minute time limit, your classic Ric Flair, Rick Steamboat style match, then I think the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels matches looked in a much more favorable light. But because it's the Iron Man concept, that's where I think it pulls out, because I think people would give some of that boredom in the middle, some of that slow down time spots, more acceptance if you're going, they've got a 60-minute time limit, and they're going to go nearly the time. I think they're trying to do a Flair Steamboat style thing. I think it would be viewed in a much better way now than it is. Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
So there we go. I think we came up with a pretty good scenario in that aspect, that maybe 93 was still too early for him. I think Vince still liked Yoko better as the champion at that point. Again, because like you said, of the Hogan situation. So I think we have some good scenarios there. I think the Owen winning works, and having a good run in having a good run in 95, and then he's the one that passes it off to Brett, and maybe we get to Shawn, and maybe we get a better Iron Man that's not as boring or shoot fighting in terms of I'm not letting this guy pin me stuff. So where do we go next, Dave? What's the next scenario as we are floating through the alternate universe?
Well, I think the next stop, I guess, is we've already raised the fact that Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, they went to WCW. The NWO was formed, and I wonder if there was ever a chance for Scott to have a run with the title in WCW, because just about everyone had a run with the title in WCW. I mean,
yeah, it's true.
I mean, hell, Scott, I think if you were wrestling in WCW, you could have had a title run there.
Pretty much.
It felt like that for a while. And one of the reasons I wanted to raise this is while Kevin and Scott often played second fiddle to Hogan's politics and Hogan's desire to always be the champ for all time, in late 97, Scott Hall won the World War III Battle Royal, and the World War III Battle Royal always came with the just like the Rumble, the prize was a World Championship shot. Now, I want to throw it out there. Could that have been harnessed in a better way than what it was? And I know that WCW didn't think ahead very well and didn't plan very well, and you've really got to deal with Hogan's politics. But if they had gone the way of Sting winning the title legitimately at Starrcade and not the crap that they put on, which meant you don't have the belt held up and the bloody rematches that they did.
Yep.
You could have had Sting as the champion, Scott Hall sitting on this world title shot, and you've got Goldberg starting to build underneath with the momentum that he's starting to build. And I was wondering whether or not Scott Hall, if they could have harnessed that championship shot and given Scott Hall a short run with the title and had Scott Hall be the one who drops the belt to Goldberg. And how that sits with people.
I feel like is Goldberg winning over Scott Hall have the same gravitas as Goldberg beating Hogan? That's the only question, because I think the only problem with Goldberg at the time, or with that win, is that Hogan had already lost the belt once in a, for lack of a better term, a throwaway match to Lex Luger on that Nitro, and then he holds it for a week, and then he loses it at Road Wild or Hog Wild, whatever the hell it was called in 97. So if you look at it that way, could you carry Scott Hall as a champion to the point where he could be built up as a credible contender or a credible champion that's big enough for WCW to draw Goldberg beating him? Now, the only way maybe you get away with that is if you just do it in a squash. Like Goldberg, since it's the back end of Scott Hall's career at this point, it's not like you got to put him over or anything. You maybe have, Goldberg beat him in like a minute at that point. That's to me the only way that I think that works. Because at that point, Scott Hall's not Hogan. So I don't feel like the match as a whole has that as big a deal than the Hogan-Goldberg one they had in July of 98 at the Georgia Dome would have, particularly since it's Goldberg's backyard. Now, if we didn't have the Wolfpack and all this splitting and all this crap by 98, although I don't know if the Wolfpack was a thing in 98, I guess it kind of was. And you've got like a split. If the NWO was still rock solid and Goldberg had to have all these dudes have to go through all these guys to get to Scott Hall on this one night on Nitro, you get one shot, Goldberg, but you have to stay undefeated. You don't beat Scott Hall, you're done in this company. You get one shot and that's it. And then you're out of here. You're a flash in the pan. You're a floozy. You've had, they could rip him. Your streak's been predicated on a bunch of losers like Raven and all these guys they can make fun of because they love burying guys like that in the company. And then lead it to that. Maybe you could get away with that because at that point, Scott Hall's not a up and coming stud that you're going to keep around anyway. So if you wanted to give Scott Hall just for kind of like Bob Backlund in 94, if you want to give him if he left the WWF without winning the world title and you wanted to give Scott Hall this one kind of shining lifetime achievement award title, similar to Hogan winning it winning the WWF title at Backlash 2002 over Triple H, similar to that, then you could. And he gets his moment, and then Goldberg totally fucking buries him in a minute and a half. All right, I could go with that, but you can't build it the same way you built Hogan and Goldberg because Scott Hall just doesn't have that gravitas that Hogan does. But you could, you could book something similar to that in terms of getting Goldberg over, just in a different style than what they did with him and Hogan.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head right at the beginning. There was something special about Goldberg beating Hogan. There was something that made it such a big thing that he beat the legend that is Hulk Hogan and the guy who had, by hook, by crook, and by political, chicanery, had that title for so long. So I think I agree. I don't think that would be the time for Scott Hall to do it. I raised it because they had given him the World War III spot, and it showed, I guess, that WCW did still have faith that Scott Hall can be at the upper end of the card, and perhaps they had that faith a little bit earlier than they might have been willing to give Nash the run. If Scott Hall hadn't had the demons rise up again, hadn't had his issues that he had, and which were unfortunately they turned storyline at the back end of 98, and I always hated that storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Is Hall a credible option instead of Nash? Do we come back to where we came to earlier? Do we sub Nash out and Hall comes into that spot? Is Hall a credible person to end the streak? If he hasn't hit, I'm not saying he doesn't win the title earlier in the year, everything happens the way it happened. Can you just straight out substitute Hall into that spot instead of Nash? Does it work?
I don't see why not. I mean, I don't understand. I still always wondered at that back end of 98 why Kevin Nash was this big deal kind of thing. Why Nash was so Like that Goldberg, I always wondered why that Goldberg-Nash match at Starrcade 98 was such a big friggin' deal. Like I never really got it. So my answer is yes, I think you can. I think you can easily put Scott Hall in that slot, and it works just as well, I think. You still have the streak end with, this is kind of like a continuation of what we talked about back in our third episode of the show. We talked about Goldberg's streak. We really didn't bring up Scott Hall because we were more looking at it we weren't talking about Goldberg opponents as much as it was how to keep him undefeated. So that was different. That's why we didn't bring up Scott Hall there, because we weren't talking about guys for him to lose to. This is different because we're trying to talk about guys he could lose to. And again, I never wondered why Goldberg was such a big deal. I'm sorry, Kevin Nash was such a big deal as that guy at Starrcade 98. Like, why? I don't understand what the big deal was about that match. It's just Kevin Nash. It's nothing earth-shattering. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't see why. Like, for me, Scott Hall, now, let me ask you this, Dave, before we continue. We're predicating this on the fact that he would have never won the world title in the WWF to this point.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is different. I think it's a better story. Scott Hall might be, maybe he starts cutting promos like, listen, Goldberg, I need this. I've gone my whole career. I've won all championships. They talked about WWF back then. Nobody gave a shit. I won the Intercontinental title. I've won tag titles. I've won the U.S. title. I've won, but I've never been a world champion. So you're going to get the real Scott Hall at Starrcade. You're not going to get the guy who's drunk. You're not going to get the, hey, yo, survey time. You're going to get me. The guy who's busted his ass for, at this point, 14 years to be in this business. You're going to get the real me at Starrcade. So to be honest, Dave, the story might be even more compelling if it's Scott Hall and Goldberg at Starrcade 98 instead of Kevin Nash. Because Kevin Nash had already won the WWF title. Who cared? But if Scott Hall changes his tune and starts cutting promos that are in that vein of, listen, Goldberg, you're just in my way. Look at you. You just walked into this freaking place, beat a bunch of scrubs, and now you're champion. I've broken my ass for 14 years watching everybody else become champion. Well, I just got to high five and cut promos. It's my turn. I am not ending my career without being the world champion at least once, and you're just in my way. So you're going to get the best Scott Hall that you'll ever see.
Yeah.
I'm serious. If they change Scott Hall's tone in the back end of 98 and put him in Kevin Nash's slot for Starrcade, I'm telling you, I think you would get a good, compelling story about a guy who's going to say, I'm tired of being everybody's best friend. Oh, well, Shawn Michaels was world champion. I was his boy. Oh, Kevin Nash was champion. I was his boy. I'm tired of being everybody else's boy. I want to be the man. You know what I mean?
And that was part of, if I remember right, and I mean, look, we're talking, I mean, how long is it now? 23 years ago.
Yeah.
But if I remember right, part of the whole breakup, part of the Nash Hall breakup and in 98 where Hall turned on Nash, part of the concept I thought was that not necessarily as overt as that, but certainly that underlying thing of, I'm not going to be held back by you anymore. You always take the limelight. You've always had the attention, and I want what's due me. So that storyline that you've put forward and those interview ideas, to me, sits in with the whole reason why he turned his back on Kevin Nash and why they broke up. He chose to break the Outsiders up in the first place, was that idea of, this is my time. This is not about you anymore. This is about me and me getting what is due me and not having to share it. So it fit not just a build into a Goldberg match, but it fit the reasons why he turned his back on Kevin Nash in the first place.
Right. So I think you really can get a good story out of this. I really do.
Mm.
So maybe he's not the guy that loses to Goldberg, but maybe he is the guy that maybe beats Goldberg. Because let's be honest, this isn't the this is at the time, and I don't want to get too much into Goldberg's streak because again, we did an entire episode on it.
Mm.
But this isn't Taker. This isn't Brock at WrestleMania 30 where we're all like, "What the frig?" And we had that conversation too on our last episode. so we know a lot about streaks, Dave and I. But all right, so Scott Hall broke Goldberg's streak. Who the hell else in that company at that time would have gotten a rub on beating Goldberg's streak? Booker T hadn't reached that single status yet. I mean, he was feuding with Benoit with the, well, it was the TV title or the US title. I think it was the TV title.
TV.
So, that was, but was there anybody, Scott Steiner? I mean, come on. There was nobody in that company that you could look at and go, and we've talked about this, Dave, in the episode we did about this, so I'm not going to go too deep in the weeds, but at this point, if you're going to give Scott Hall that shot, I think it's fine. Because there's nobody else in that company. Because, again, we're thinking that at the time, WCW is going to be around for a while. It wasn't until, mid to late 2000 that the WCW was. So, late 98, they were still kind of feeling good about themselves. We don't know how long Goldberg's streak would have gone when we're talking about this specific scenario. So who knows? But at least I think you would have gotten a much more compelling story than Kevin Nash in that spot. Because Scott Hall could have cut some serious, like they would have had to tell him, listen, Scott, you got to stop fucking around. You need to be serious now. We really need to build this match to something huge. So you could say, listen, I'm tired of being everybody's like pal. I got to stand around and celebrate with everybody else when they won the world title. This is my chance, Goldberg. My chance now. And you're not going to get the goofy, shit-faced Scott Hall. You're going to get the guy who was Razor Ramon or whatever. You're going to get the guy from the early mid-90s who was at the top of his game.
Yeah.
I think that works.
It does. I think it would have been a good cap, a good way. And like you said, it's that sort of moment. He doesn't need to hold it long. He can whatever, they could transition it off. He could hold it for, who knows? They could have done all sorts of things, but and a lot of it would have been predicated on how long he can stay clean for. And you're in an era then when if he does start to have troubles with his demons, you just take the belt off him at a Nitro or a Thunder, and you just move on. You can deal with the demons in a much quicker way than Vince could have in WWE in 93, 94, 95. When things were taped 3-4 weeks in advance, and you couldn't, a sudden change in direction was very difficult to deal with. So it certainly would have made a good story. And the reality is that concept, that story would have fit any time post Goldberg as well. Up till the end of WCW, you could have run that storyline, the whole I want my time storyline, at any point for Scott Hall post 98. The problem is that the demons were well and truly ingrained by that point, and he couldn't stay sober enough long enough to get through a few weeks, let alone build into a championship reign. Whereas at least at that back end of 98, he had the credibility of the NWO run. He had, Hogan was temporarily out of the picture, and he was, I think, he was probably sober enough. Yeah, because they obviously had their eye on him, because they, in the real world, he was part of the storyline, and they were building into, he had the match with Goldberg. 4 weeks later, it sold out. So he was obviously sober enough for long enough that they could build a bit of a storyline around him anyway. So you could have done that world championship opportunity, and I think it would have been easily acceptable, and probably more palatable than what they did with the Nash storyline.
Yeah, and And I think it would have been a good capper for him. And if he wanted to be like, all right, I'm good, he holds the belt for what, a month, couple months, and then, loses at Super Brawl, Goldberg wins it back or whatever, and then we move along. Because at that point, if Goldberg's still a main eventer, he's still a stud, and Goldberg would still be the top guy. Maybe the streak's over, but streaks, I mean, that only goes so long, you know what I mean? WrestleMania streaks are one thing, but trying to win every match ever, how long is that going to last before it starts to lose its luster and you bury the whole roster? So, Scott Hall wins it, gets his crowning moment as champion. Maybe even a baby face, like, kind of like Taker at SummerSlam 98 shooing off Kane against Steve Austin. The NWO guys come in and say, no. I need to do this myself. Hit the bricks. And then he wins the title, and then the next on a Nitro, they beat the crap out of him. And
for not letting them help him. You've obviously turned your back on us.
Yep.
And then he can have a series of, he can have his match. He can have a match with Nash then. I mean, that would actually that would have made a good storyline from there. He the NWO, he thinks he's standing up for himself. I'm going to do this myself. The next Nitro or the week after, the NWO go, hell no, you've turned your back on us. Bang, beat down. Hogan comes back. You could have a Hall Nash match. You could have a Hall Hogan match. You could have Hall have a series of battles with the NWO in a way that would have been interesting.
Yeah, and and then he gets his moment, and a much deserved one for a guy that busted his ass for 15 years, helping other guys get over as champion. And this is his one moment that he could be a champion. I don't think it's that big a deal. I don't think it's anything that would have hurt anything. And I think maybe it might have been something to keep WCW afloat.
Yeah. Yeah,
quite
possibly.
It might have been very helpful, to keep the company going if you do a storyline that's compelling for a guy that's still universally liked in Scott Hall,
Yeah.
So I like that, Dave. I'm very proud of that scenario we just came up with. Kudos to you and I. I'm proud of that. That's our little Easter gift to each other. Who needs chocolate when we can give Scott Hall the world title, right? No calories on that one. So, but what about let me help you with this one. I mean, he obviously comes back, so he leaves WCW when WCW, hit the shitter. He was one of many who, instead of going to Vince, decided to just steal Time Warner's money for sitting on their lazy asses for a year. And honestly, if you were them, I would too. I'm like, Vince will want us eventually. Don't worry about it. Let's just take Time Warner's money instead of ripping Vince off for being lazy. Screw it. We'll steal Time Warner's money, and then we'll talk to Vince. And then go from there. So that's what he does. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Hogan, all those guys, they sit home throughout 2001 while WWF does their invasion storyline, stealing money from the company, from Time Warner. And then, of course, Scott Hall comes back in 2002. What do we think? What do we think about 2002? Obviously, the way it happened was not great.
I think the thing about 2002 is, again, when I look at what they did when they brought him in, and what they did is they immediately put him with Austin. Now, we know where that ended up going. Austin didn't like it. Austin didn't want to really do it. And this was a byproduct of the fact that depending on who you listen to, Austin maybe didn't want to work with Hogan, so they went the next line. But and Austin had reservations about maybe Scott Hall's ability to stay clean. There's all sorts of stories there, but they put Hall with Austin. Again, showing that in Vince's eyes, he's a top guy. He's a guy that he sees can work at the top of the card. So, you've got it. If you start with the premise that there's something in Scott Hall that Vince saw as marketable as I'm putting him against Austin at WrestleMania. Now the match was terrible, and they didn't build out of it appropriately. And then I think more importantly, and there's other reasons for how the storylines were built. Austin spitting his dummy and going home and all that sort of jazz. And then you had the whole airplane ride from hell, which, it bit Scott Hall, it bit Kurt Hennig, it bit a couple of other guys in the arse and cost him. But again, if Hall was able to keep himself out of trouble, they are definitely positioning him for something. Whether or not he would have had a world title run in 2002, I don't think it would have happened then. But it certainly, can you imagine Scott Hall having a run as a challenger for Hunter? Hunter's just wins the title at that Mania, taking the belt off Jericho. And then they did, what happened post WrestleMania? What happened at the, in that 2002 post WrestleMania time period? There's another podcast for another day. The entire storyline is, but you've got Hunter as champion. Razor Scott Hall would have been a real good challenger for Hunter off the bat. I think it would have been something, if you wanted to keep the belt on Hunter for a while, there's a credible challenger. There's someone who could do it. I think in 2002 there was no chance of a title run at that point, but he certainly could have been in the picture, helping put Hunter over, helping that journey. They go to the two belts later in the year, and if he was able to stay clean and stay with the company that long, he's a guy you could easily have put into that slot of, the way they've done over the past few years with Samoa Joe, the way they did for Kane for so many years. We've got a world champion. We want a credible challenger to help legitimize a championship reign. Scott Hall could have fit that role quite easily in 2002, 2003.
Maybe. I think this is an even deeper hole than, say, 95 into 96 when it came to Scott Hall's problems. I think by 2002 he was just looking for the check. So the answer to your question, would he have been a credible challenger for Hunter? I think I have to say no. I think at this point, I think the problem was, and I hate to say this about Stone Cold, but Austin really had no one to blame but himself on this one, because Hogan and Austin was the match everybody wanted to see. And because you had the two, no disrespect to Rock, but Austin and Hogan were the two biggest icons of the two eras of wrestling at that time. Hogan was the face of the Federation era. Austin was the face of the Attitude Era. Who was the bigger champion? Who was the bigger money guy? Who was the man? That was the match that should have happened at WrestleMania 18. And It didn't, because Austin was feeling weird. So he blew that off. So Scott Hall was his only other option unless he did nothing. So I can't, as much as that match is not great, and Rock Hogan ended up becoming an iconic match, Hogan and Austin is what really should have happened and didn't. So I don't know what Hall could have done at that point, but I do think that he was there because Nash and Hogan went, and they were there to pay the bills. He was there to take a check. So was he in any capacity to be a challenger for anything major? No, I don't think so.
But if you look at who was around at the time, and and it was a strong roster, but with what happened almost immediately after, Rock leaves, Austin leaves, Flair's doing his thing. You've always got Taker. He's always around. But if you wanted to give Triple H a longer run with the title than they did, and look, this isn't the podcast to get into that. This isn't the episode to get into that storyline.
Right. Yep.
But if they wanted to give him a run longer than they did, in my mind, they could have put Scott Hall into a shot against Hunter, and I don't think anyone would have sat there and gone, "Oh, that doesn't work. It's never going to work, that match." I think who Scott Hall was and what he brings to the ring, if he was put into a match with Hunter for the title, I don't think anyone would have sat there and gone, "Oh, it never works." I think everyone would have assumed Hunter would have won, which if you're trying to build a run for him, it does. I think I agree that I just don't think he would have been able to stay in his right mind long enough to build up, because it's not something you would have done in the first month or two. It's something you might have done maybe before a SummerSlam, like, a month before SummerSlam. If they gave Hunter a long reign, he works through, he gets a win over Hogan, he gets a win over Taker. Well, where does he go next? He's knocking over he's already beaten Jericho, he's already beaten these guys. I could see that if Hall had hung around and you booked him right, it would have been very easy to go, we're going to give Scott Hall a shot here. He's never had a title run. He's never been a champion. Scott Hall does the whole, it's my time, you've had your time, that we've talked that storyline through. I think it would have been acceptable to the fans, but you no way could you have ever put him over. I just don't think he could have made it long enough. I think what we saw from him was where it was going to go all time. And I just think, I just bring it back to the fact that he was in such a prominent position when they brought him back in, that it sits there, it stands to reason that if he was clean, I could see Vince saying, why don't we have Hunter wrestle Scott Hall next month for the title. I think I could just see it happening, because it seems that Vince still saw something in Scott Hall until the airplane ride happened.
Perhaps. If there's anybody in my podcasting life, Dave, that can sell ice to an Eskimo, I think that would be you, because you're starting to I think I might be picking up what you're putting down, because we take into account about the whole Hogan thing that happened with Rock at WrestleMania, and Vince jumped on that like immediately, more for money than anything else, because he only held the belt a month, just like Triple H only held the belt a month. So the chance that Hunter holds the world title for longer than a month, and maybe he goes, does Hogan stay a heel and the NWO still stalks the company and stalks Triple H, and Hall gets maybe the title shot at Backlash, and then Nash maybe gets the title shot at Judgment Day, and then we hold off Taker, and Hogan never wins the belt, because obviously that was never a thought when they got there the first time, when they first got there in the first place. So you might be right. Maybe he's a guy that that maybe that's a possibility. That might be a possibility. I tell you, Dave, you're amazing. Because I don't know if I could have done that. I think you might have sold me on that, at least for one title shot. I wouldn't have had him win it.
No,
but
it's a shot. It's that, like you said, I think you've got to predicate it on, you don't have Hogan go face. You don't give the title to Hogan. Like, I think the original plan for Triple H was to hold the belt until at least SummerSlam. And then we saw the swell of Brock. You could have had Brock if they could. I wouldn't have all been surprised. Triple H holds the belt till SummerSlam. Brock beats him there. You know, I think that would have been the thing. But to get Triple H to SummerSlam, he's got to have other title matches. And I think if Hall stayed in his right mind, you know, you could have had Triple H beat Hogan. You then could have had Hall and Nash go, oh yeah, no, now it's our turn. You know, that he beats Hall, he beats Nash, or you know, he beats Hall, he goes on, he beats Taker, he beats, you know, Rock, and then, you know, he ends up facing Brock at SummerSlam, and then I think Brock was always on a trajectory. So I don't think anything would have changed that.
No, I don't think so either. So, and then the plane ride from hell happened, and everything went downhill from there.
And I raise it because you look at what they did 2 years later with when Hunter is in that super long reign, and then Nash comes back, and Nash has his little two pay-per-view series with Hunter then, with no real backstory. Yeah, it's not that everyone knew they were mates. Everyone knew they were friends. Everyone knew that Nash was never going to win the title. But you still looked at him and went, I can see why it would be at least acceptable. I just see that Hall just sort of fits in that same mold, but Hall is always going to put on a better match than Nash does. You know, that's how I see Hall, and that's why I wonder if Vince would have done it had we not had the plane ride from hell. It might not have been Backlash. It could have been King of the Ring. It could have been anywhere in that 6 month time period where he goes, okay, we'll give Hall a shot so that we just get through another month. I just think it would have happened.
Yeah. I think you could have done it. Yeah, I think you could have done it. I think you just sold me. Just give him a one shot, help Hunter kind of put over his reign, and then
and I guess you in that mold you're using Hunter to end the NWO. So, you know, we're just another thing that Hunter's killed in his you know, over the course of his career.
And I think he'd be very proud of that, as would I. This was a lot of fun, Dave. I think we, you know, I get more and more confident whenever you and I are together on this fine program to dive into a storyline that, or dive into a journey that we might not be able to tackle. I didn't think we could tackle the Ultimate with the Goldberg streak. That I thought was tricky. I think we did a good job with Ultimate War. I mean, all our shows are great, but those couple in particular, because when I was doing my research, I'm like, wow, can Dave and I pull this off? And this was another one that I thought, what could we do? And we did. So I hope everyone enjoyed this. Well, you added a question here that I think maybe we can tackle maybe for another day when we bring up somebody else. But are there other guys on the pantheon of Scott Hall level of guys who the greatest ever that never won the world title? Scott Hall.
I think we mentioned that very early on You've got your Kurt Hennigs, you've got your Ted DiBiase's, and I'm sure, we could probably come up with a list of another 9 or 10 people that, your Roddy Pipers, people who never won the world title, and the business has changed. Yeah, the business has clearly changed. I mean, if those guys were wrestling in their prime today, every single one of them probably would have multiple world title reigns to their name now. But it's a different time these days. It's a different era. But Scott Hall is certainly one that is up there. I think if Scott Hall was at his peak, if Razor Ramon came along in the mid 2000s, I think Razor would have had. We would be talking about. I think he would be comparable to someone like Edge. If Hall had come along in the modern era in the last 20 years, rose up and hit his stride in the modern era, I think we'd be talking about him in a similar vein to the way we talk about Edge.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He came up he came up just before that era, in a time when you didn't. Yeah, the world titles weren't handed out like lollipops, and the guys, it was a lot harder to earn them, and it was a lot harder to hold them, and I think we've shown tonight that Scott Hall wouldn't have been out of place on a couple of occasions, that it legitimately probably could have taken a title run where he was and held it, and it would have been acceptable to the audience of the day. So, I think that's a credit to how good Scott Hall was in the ring, the characters that he portrayed. He will be missed. We're not going to hear, when they do these reunion specials, we're not going to see any more hey yos. We're not going to have any more surveys. And, it's you're not going to potentially have the clamoring for, could he pull off one more match? We're never going to see that opportunity. It's a shame that Scott Hall's demons got the better of him for so long, and he was going through all the rehab and all the stuff he went through to try and rebuild his life. And it would have been great to see Scott Hall. I guess for me, the last memory we have of Scott Hall in ring, apart from sort of Raw anniversaries, is that WrestleMania run-in with the Hunter Sting match.
Yes.
It would have been nice we spoke at the beginning of the show about Austin getting that farewell match. It would have been nice for Scott Hall to maybe get a farewell match at a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam. We're never going to get that now. It's a shame. And he will be missed.
He will. And he is in that pantheon. I just wanted to make everyone, a reminder of that, because I know we kind of talked about it earlier and we mixed it into the other topics, but I wanted to really put in there the guys like a Piper and a Perfect. Although Perfect technically was AWA world champion, depending on it depends on how much you think that title has any credence. But anyway, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Through the Looking Glass. I had a blast. I always have a blast when I'm with Dave. Dave, I know we bring it up every month, but again, for someone who's listening to this for the first time, where can everyone find you?
So you can find me on Facebook, usually lurking the PTB pages. Feel free to message up. I don't do Twitter. I'm not that sort of. I've sort of steered clear of Twitter, but feel free to hit me up through Facebook. And if you want to hear some more stuff that I'm doing, jump over to the North South stream and the Cronoso Dailies. You'll hear a little bit of me through there every couple of weeks.
It's pretty great over there in the Cronoso. It's pretty good. You can obviously, unfortunately, I do Twitter, but I try to avoid all the muckety muck. You can follow me on Twitter at Scott C. Podfather. But most definitely follow the brand on Twitter at PTBN Wrestling. We do a ton of polls. After this episode drops, go to Twitter. I might actually put a question. What do you think of, what do you think of our theories of Scott Hall and where he could be in our scenarios as world champion. Are we out of our mind? Could it not happen? Do you have other scenarios in your head that could happen? Share them with us, because we love to hear from all of you, and we always thank you for making us what we are here on the PTB Wrestling Network. Not just this show, but all the shows. Of course, yesterday a new episode of Pedestal dropped. If you're listening to this on Wednesday when it does drop, later this week we'll have a new episode of Highway to the Impact Zone, a new episode of NWA Crock and Roll. And, of course, this weekend, a new episode of the NWA Saturday Special with myself and Dr. G. That'll do it. Join us next month for another crazy installment of Through the Looking Glass, where we'll pick up some strange Dave, somewhere in the recesses of Dave's mind. We'll find some crazy question where we go to an alternate universe and try and fix something, or look on the alternate side of something that happened in wrestling. Thanks for joining us. For Dave, I'm Scott. You have been Through the Looking Glass.